But she is she's our mother, and I think change happens, but I don't.
It began with whispers, jewels vanishing without a trace, vault records mysteriously altered, and staff too frightened to speak. But this wasn't just a robbery. It was the prelude to a much darker scheme orchestrated from within the palace. What no one expected was that the thief wasn't an outsider, but someone bound by blood to Queen Camilla herself. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. It started quietly, with an unease that swept through Buckingham's corridors like an invisible chill. An aide noticed an heirloom brooch missing from its velvet box, then a pearl necklace gone from its case. At first, the palace brushed it aside, clerical error, misplacement, routine reorganization. But as the inconsistencies grew, a troubling pattern emerged. The royal inventory, normally airtight and obsessively logged, began to reveal gaps, names erased, records rewritten, and vault visits that didn't appear on the schedule. Behind closed doors, whispers grew louder. Some staff murmured that they'd seen individuals entering restricted chambers without authorization, yet when questioned, they suddenly went silent as if someone powerful had warned them. Others hinted at being offered quiet bribes, told to forget what they'd seen in exchange for their continued employment. It wasn't just fear of losing their jobs, it was fear of crossing a line that could destroy their lives. Even the palace's internal CCTV, renowned for its precision, suffered unexplained failures. Cameras went dark during critical hours, and the footage when retrieved appeared tampered with. For every question raised, 2 more were buried under royal discretion. Yet one detail stood out to investigators. The timeline of the thefts perfectly aligned with Camilla's discreet, unrecorded trips abroad, journeys that never appeared on official calendars but were quietly approved through back channels. Deep, beneath the palace, where only a handful of senior royals are permitted entry, lay the crown's most sacred vault. It's where the Queen's jewels, symbols of centuries-old power, are stored, untouched except for ceremonial use. The fact that these specific pieces were missing pointed to one horrifying conclusion. Whoever was behind this wasn't just stealing, they were defying the sanctity of the monarchy itself. Then came the breaking point. A long-serving royal aide, tormented by guilt and fear, broke their silence. In a trembling voice, they confessed that the thefts weren't random. They had witnessed shipments being quietly prepared, jewel cases marked for archival inspection, but redirected under a new code. And the name on those confidential transport orders? Parker Bowles. The revelation hit the palace like a thunderclap. It wasn't an intruder, not a foreign spy, but someone of royal blood. The question that now haunted everyone, from senior courtiers to the king himself, wasn't how the jewels were stolen, but why. But as suspicion swirled behind Buckingham's walls, no one was prepared for the name that would surface, a name Camilla spent years protecting. Polished in public but troubled in private, Tom Parker Bowles always felt like a royal outsider with something to prove. When questioned about the missing heirlooms, his unexpected response would crack open a scandal that even Camilla couldn't contain. Born into privilege, but never fully embraced by the crown, Tom Parker Bowles lived a life tangled between aristocracy and exclusion. He wasn't raised for a throne, nor molded for royal duty. He was Camilla's son, the child of a woman once branded a scandalous mistress, and later controversially crowned queen. From childhood, Tom watched as doors opened for princes and dukes but remained half shut for him. The resentment festered quietly, masked by charm, wit, and the facade of a man who didn't need the monarchy's approval. But beneath that calm surface was a storm of inferiority, pride, and longing for his own legacy. His relationship with King Charles had always been cordial but cold. Charles treated Tom with a kind of distant politeness, never quite welcoming him into the royal fold. And as Camilla rose beside Charles, Tom remained on the sidelines, present, but never central. It was a role that gnawed at him more than he would admit. In the years following Camilla's ascension as queen consort, Tom's life seemed to unravel and flourish at the same time. His food critic career had grown stagnant, his publishing deals inconsistent, and yet he appeared in luxury hotspots around Europe, investing in elite properties, dining at members-only clubs, and donning timepieces that cost more than some royal salaries. Rumors began to bubble, rumors about debts left behind at exclusive resorts, hush payments to former business partners, and late-night calls to high-stakes bookmakers. Financial records, quietly investigated by palace insiders, revealed erratic banking activity. Deposits from offshore accounts began to mirror the dates of the reported jewel disappearances. Then came the first intercepted message, an encrypted email flagged by MI5 during routine cyber surveillance. Though vague in wording, it referenced delivery of the items and confirmation of mother's approval. The metadata traced back to Tom's personal laptop. Camilla, informed discreetly by royal security, demanded answers from her son in a private meeting that no one was supposed to know about. But voices carry in Windsor, and what began as a tense conversation quickly escalated into a shouting match so loud it echoed into the adjoining chambers. Tom accused her of using him of dangling royal influence without ever granting him the protection or power that came with it. Camilla, in turn, accused him of dragging her name through the mud, jeopardizing everything she had built. Tears followed. Accusations were hurled. But by the time Tom walked out, the damage was done. He didn't deny the allegations. He only asked, "What do you think all this was for?" And yet, Tom's confession wasn't just about jewels. It was about a mother's ambition that ran far deeper than the crown ever imagined. Why would Camilla risk everything, the crown, her marriage, the monarchy, for a secret plan? Because for Camilla, securing a legacy wasn't enough. She wanted to rewrite royal history, starting with the jewels meant for future queens. For years, Camilla had lived in the long, unrelenting shadow of Diana. No matter how many public appearances she made, or how often Charles smiled beside her, the ghost of Diana's legacy lingered untouchable, revered, immortalized. The public never fully embraced Camilla as their queen. Even in triumph, she was tolerated, not adored. That quiet truth carved at her from the inside, day by day. And so, Camilla didn't just want a crown, she wanted to reshape how. History remembered her powerful, elegant, and irreplaceable. To do that, she needed symbols, icons, pieces of the monarchy's soul that had long belonged to the memory of others. And that's where the jewels came in. Diana's sapphire tiara, Queen Elizabeth's brooches, necklaces worn by monarchs through war, peace, and coronation. These were more than adornments. They were statements of power, prestige, and permanence. To wear them was to be seen as the embodiment of royal continuity. Camilla knew that as long as these pieces remained in the possession of Catherine, Anne, or anyone tied to Diana's bloodline, she would never command that same reverence. So she moved quietly, precisely. A hidden vault, accessed only by a handful of trusted aides, became the epicenter of her plan. Piece by piece, the jewels were removed under the guise of restoration or relocation authorizations signed, records wiped, cameras conveniently under maintenance. And Tom? He wasn't just a son, swept up in scandal. He was the courier, the hands that carried out her will. Flights to Geneva, quick stops in Milan, unregistered packages delivered under diplomatic cover. On the surface, it looked like a lavish lifestyle. Underneath, it was a web of deception threaded through the very heart of the crown. What Camilla planned to do with these heirlooms was even more audacious. Her intention wasn't to sell them, it was to reframe them. A private exhibit outside of Britain was in development, branded under her name, celebrating the modern royal woman. There, she would present the jewels not as hand-me-downs from Diana or Elizabeth, but as pieces redefined by Camilla's own reign. Behind palace doors, she worked to quietly erase traces of ownership that tied the jewels to Catherine. Photos were removed from archives. Official gift logs mysteriously vanished. Curators were paid to reinterpret lineage in upcoming displays. It was a campaign to sever the emotional chain between the people's princess and the symbols they cherished. But such a plan so intricate, so daring, was never without risk. And while Camilla believed she had every variable accounted for, every threat neutralized, She overlooked one royal whose silence had always been her greatest miscalculation. But before Camilla could finalize her plan, one person she didn't account for would rise from the shadows and derail everything. While preparing for a major royal gala, Catherine stumbled upon a shocking truth: the tiara once promised to her by the late Queen was gone. Her reaction? Quiet devastation, then swift determination to uncover the truth. It was meant to be a moment of celebration, a symbolic evening that would showcase continuity, strength, and elegance in the monarchy. Catherine, ever graceful under pressure, had chosen the sapphire tiara that once belonged to Diana, the one personally promised to her by Queen Elizabeth shortly before her passing. It wasn't just a piece of jewelry. It was history, love, and legacy, all glittering beneath its carefully cut stones. Yet, when her dresser opened the case, they were met with an unbearable silence. The velvet interior was untouched, but the tiara was missing. No explanation, no note, just absence. What was supposed to be a regal preparation turned into a cold, paralyzing moment of betrayal. Catherine didn't panic. She internalized the shock like only a future queen could. But behind her composed demeanor was a tidal wave of confusion and pain. That tiara symbolized her bond with Diana, an unspoken sisterhood between two women thrown into royal duty under the world's microscope. Losing it wasn't just a personal loss, it felt like erasure. Without making a scene, she requested the official inventory, double-checked the records, and scanned the last known access logs. That's when a name surfaced that made her stomach turn: Tom Parker Bowles. He had signed in as a guest, months prior, with quiet approval, from someone at the top. That night, Catherine sought out Charles. Their conversation was short, tense, and filled with emotion beneath carefully chosen words. When she presented the access logs, Charles didn't deny the facts, he simply looked away. His silence confirmed what she feared. Camilla knew. And worse, Charles had allowed it to happen. Something inside Catherine shifted in that moment, not bitterness, but clarity. This wasn't just a theft. It was part of something larger. A pattern. A power play. An attempt to rewrite the narrative, one where Diana's memory faded and Camilla's reign stood untouched. Refusing to be sidelined, Catherine reached out to the one royal she knew would understand, Princess Anne. In a secret meeting held without staff or security, the two women compared notes, cross-referenced missing items, and quietly realized just how deep the cover-up had gone. Anne, known for her no-nonsense loyalty to tradition, was furious. But Catherine? She was resolute. This wasn't just about reclaiming jewels. It was about protecting a legacy, one that millions still clung to. "I will not let her rewrite Diana's story," she whispered under her breath as Anne nodded in solemn agreement. Catherine's heartbreak would become fuel, and with Princess Anne on her side, they were about to turn the tide against Camilla. Princess Anne had seen enough betrayals in her lifetime. But this was treason in pearls and velvet. With a quiet nod to tradition and a sharp eye for justice, she launched her own investigation, one that would put her directly at odds with her brother's wife. Anne had always been the monarchy's quiet sentinel. She never chased headlines, nor courted favor, but she understood the true weight of tradition. While others focused on appearances, Anne protected the heart of the crown, the history, the integrity, the continuity. So when Catherine came to her, pale-faced and furious over the stolen tiara, Anne didn't hesitate. She had long suspected something beneath the surface was shifting. This wasn't about fashion or misplaced sentiment. This was about the systematic dismantling of royal legacy, one jewel, one record, one lie at a time, and she would not let it go unanswered. Without alerting the palace bureaucracy, Anne assembled her own team, trusted archivists, old palace insiders, and a few loyal members of staff who owed her more than favors, they owed her their careers. They combed through old logs, inventory audits, security memos, and restricted ledgers that hadn't seen daylight in decades. It was through this quiet army that Anne began to uncover the horrifying pattern. The same missing heirlooms Catherine had noticed were tied to transport logs, each coinciding with Tom Parker Bowles' international travel. And not just any travel destinations that didn't align with his public itinerary. Geneva, Milan, Dubai. Cities known for discretion, luxury, and secrecy. One name kept surfacing: a private jeweler with a royal warrant quietly revoked years ago. Anne arranged a discreet visit, far from the public eye. The conversation was tense, but revealing. The jeweler admitted he had been commissioned to restore and rehouse certain royal items under a sealed agreement, pieces he recognized immediately as part of the monarchy's historic collection. He provided documents, contracts, even photographs, proof that the jewels had not been stolen to disappear, but repurposed for something much more calculated. The trail then led to a financial institution buried beneath layers of corporate shells, a Swiss vault tied to a private account under Camilla's alias. When Anne saw the banking statements, transfers, appraisals, holding fees, she knew. This wasn't a misunderstanding or a misstep, it was a campaign. But nothing struck her harder than the emotional realization that her brother's wife, the woman who now wore the crown beside him, had desecrated the very things their mother once protected with her life. Anne stood in the palace archives, surrounded by empty cases, faded labels, and voided entries. For a brief moment, the stoic princess closed her eyes and felt the sting of betrayal. Not just against her or Catherine, but against everything the monarchy claimed to stand for. But just as Anne was preparing to expose the truth, Camilla launched a bold counterattack to silence the royal women once and for all. Camilla didn't deny the allegations, she dismissed them with contempt, and in doing so, she launched a full-blown offensive, stripping privileges, cutting off access, and igniting a war inside the Windsor bloodline that hadn't been seen in decades. The moment whispers turned to accusations, Camilla acted not with fear, but fury. For her, this wasn't about defending innocence. It was about crushing defiance. She knew Anne had uncovered enough to threaten everything, and Catherine's quiet strength had suddenly become a rallying force within the palace. Camilla moved swiftly, with the precision of someone who had been preparing for this kind of confrontation all her life. Invitations to Anne were suddenly lost in the system. Her appearances at state functions were cancelled without notice. Behind the scenes, Camilla leaned on key aides, demanding that Anne be painted as an unpredictable liability, too old-fashioned, too rigid, too much a reminder of a bygone era. Royal protocol was weaponized against the very woman who had spent decades upholding it. But Camilla didn't stop there. The press, always watching, always hungry, suddenly turned its lens toward Catherine. What had once been glowing coverage of a beloved future queen shifted overnight into something colder, crueler. Headlines questioned her ambition. Anonymous sources claimed tensions between her and William. Tabloids ran stories suggesting Catherine was obsessed with Diana's memory, framing her as emotionally unstable and out of touch. It was a calculated smear campaign designed to isolate, discredit, and weaken. And it worked, at least for a moment. Even within palace walls, a sense of doubt began to creep into conversations. Who was telling the truth? Who was protecting the crown? And who was threatening it from within? Leaks began to flow like poison into the bloodstream of the monarchy. Stories surfaced about William's supposed outbursts, his disappointment with Anne, and internal family fractures too intricate to trace. The goal wasn't to prove anything. The goal was confusion, cloud the truth in noise, so no one knew where the real betrayal had begun. Behind it all, Camilla pulled the strings with chilling calm. She even pressured Charles to shut down the quiet audit Anne and Catherine had requested into the royal vaults. "It's beneath us," she reportedly told him. "We're not thieves, we're sovereign." And Charles, tired, caught in a storm of loyalty and exhaustion, said nothing. Then came the moment that sent shockwaves across the palace. At a high-profile event celebrating royal heritage, Camilla arrived wearing the very tiara Catherine had discovered missing, the sapphire crown once worn by Diana herself. The message was unmistakable. This was her crown now. She didn't need to defend her claim. She would wear it, flaunt it, and dare anyone to challenge her. That night, Charles received a call from Anne. No aides, no courtiers. just brother and sister, face to face over the phone. What began as an attempt at reason turned into raw fury. Anne demanded answers. Charles offered silence. And when the line finally went dead, so did a bond that had weathered decades of royal storms. But as Camilla tightened her grip, a royal decree from King Charles himself would shake her power to its core. Charles had remained silent long enough. Watching his family crumble and Catherine retreat into shadows, he finally stepped forward not to protect Camilla, but to issue an ultimatum that would leave her reeling. The silence of a monarch carries weight, but in this case, it had become deafening. For weeks, Charles had watched as the palace descended into quiet chaos. His wife wielded her influence with unchecked aggression, while his sister and daughter-in-law fought a battle no one seemed willing to name aloud. The royal court had fractured. Staff whispered in corners. William had grown withdrawn, his patience thinning as public support wavered under the smear campaigns Camilla had unleashed. The final blow came not from gossip or public opinion, but from a simple envelope slid onto Charles's desk, Anne's private report. It contained dates, names, travel logs, and documentation so precise, so damning, that Charles could no longer shield himself from the truth. Camilla hadn't simply broken protocol. She had desecrated the sanctity of royal heritage and used their son to do it. Behind locked doors, Charles confronted Camilla. No aides, no buffers, just two people, bound by power and history. What began as calm inquiry turned into quiet devastation. Camilla, defiant as ever, refused to admit wrongdoing. She insisted everything had been in service of their image, their legacy. But Charles saw it differently. He saw greed. He saw betrayal. He saw the echo of a palace torn apart by ego and deception. For the first time in their marriage, he looked at her not as a partner, but as a threat. The toll on William had been too great. The children, especially George, had started asking questions no child in line for the throne should have to ask. Catherine's smile had dimmed. Anne's voice had cracked. This wasn't just political damage. This was a personal unraveling. And Charles knew what had to come next. In secret, a quiet investigation into royal assets was launched. Auditors worked under code names. Vaults were re-verified. Legal advisors explored worst-case scenarios, including the possibility of recovering assets from private foreign holdings. But Charles's most powerful move came without warning. One morning, a royal memo was circulated. Effective immediately, Queen Camilla would no longer hold oversight over any royal jewels, regalia, or ceremonial heirlooms. The responsibility would revert to a neutral committee led by Anne and other senior royals. No ceremony, no explanation, just a cold, swift command. Then came the public statement, brief, carefully worded, but explosive in implication. The monarchy is built upon legacy, not possession, and some traditions are not hers to touch. The message was unmistakable. Camilla's power had peaked, and now it was being peeled away. Piece by piece, the press erupted. Public opinion shifted overnight. For the first time, Camilla found herself not above the storm, but squarely in its eye. But just when it seemed Camilla was defeated, Tom's next move would send the monarchy into an even deeper spiral. No one expected Tom Parker Bowles to go public, but in a bombshell interview, he not only confessed but exposed details that shattered what little trust remained in the monarchy. It wasn't just about jewels. It was about control, corruption, and a mother's twisted ambition. The nation had barely begun to process the ripple effects of Charles's decree when a breaking news alert lit up screens across the globe. Tom Parker Bowles, Camilla's son and the man at the center of every swirling rumor, had agreed to sit down with a leading international news outlet. No palace filter, no public relations buffer, just Tom raw, emotional, and ready to speak. What followed in that interview wasn't calculated damage control, it was a collapse. On live television, he admitted everything. Through trembling words and visible regret, Tom revealed that he had knowingly transported royal heirlooms on multiple occasions, pieces he knew didn't belong to him, moved under orders he didn't dare refuse. And those orders, he said plainly, came from his mother. The interview was a reckoning. He described Camilla's vision of legacy as a personal empire, her plan to launch a private museum under her name, showcasing pieces of royal history as if they were hers to curate, reinterpret, and own. These weren't simply jewels. They were instruments of control. Objects she believed could rewrite her narrative and erase the shadows cast by Diana, Elizabeth, and the women the public had always loved more. For months, Tom had remained silent, playing the role of obedient son, loyal courier. But the weight had grown unbearable. His confession wasn't merely about smuggling diamonds, it was about being used as a pawn in a monarchy already bleeding from within. To prove he wasn't speaking in bitterness alone, Tom handed over evidence, hidden bank statements tracing offshore transactions back to Camilla's private accounts, and the sworn testimony of a former staff member who had handled the logistics under direct instruction from her. The details were shocking not just in their precision, but in their sheer audacity. Camilla's plan hadn't just been secretive. It had been sophisticated, systematic, and dangerously close to completion. What Tom couldn't undo, he tried to redeem. He looked directly into the camera and addressed William and Catherine. With tears in his eyes, he begged for their forgiveness. He admitted he had failed them, failed the family, and failed the legacy he now realized was never his to manipulate. In the hours that followed the interview, palace security acted swiftly. What remained of the stolen heirlooms, those not already vanished, were retrieved and sealed under direct royal protection. Camilla, once the center of every royal ceremony, was now a ghost in the halls of power. The public response was instant and divided. Some pitied Tom for being a broken son caught in a queen's ambition. Others saw him as complicit until it was too late. But no one denied the impact he had brought the scandal from whispers to headlines, from speculation to confession. But even as the monarchy scrambled to repair its image, one final act of defiance would define how history remembered this scandal. From ashes of betrayal, something powerful emerged, not just justice, but unity. As Catherine stood before the world, wearing the reclaimed jewels with quiet pride, it wasn't just a fashion statement, it was a message. The monarchy may bend, but it does not break. The storm had passed, but its echoes remained inside the palace walls. Camilla's scheme had unraveled, Tom had confessed, and the monarchy had been publicly tested like never before. Yet out of that chaos, two women, steady, resolute, unshaken, took it upon themselves to restore what had been nearly lost. Catherine and Princess Anne, once sidelined by strategy and silenced by tradition, now stood as the monarchy's unexpected guardians. Together, they rewrote royal protocols governing heirlooms and regalia, ensuring no single individual, no matter how powerful, could ever again manipulate the symbols of British heritage for personal gain. Their reforms were swift and firm, backed by Charles's decree and executed without spectacle, because real power doesn't scream, it endures. Camilla, now disgraced in silence, retreated from public life. An indefinite pause was the official line, but those within the palace understood it as exile. No longer involved in ceremonial matters, no longer the figure standing beside the king, she vanished from balcony appearances and banquets alike. Her portrait remained, but her influence did not. Tom, too, bowed out. In the weeks following his confession, he resigned from every royal charity and public board, issuing a final written apology to the royal family and the public. The headlines softened, but the damage lingered. Yet even in the midst of that fallout, something extraordinary occurred. The public rallied not in outrage, but in overwhelming support. For William and Catherine, for Anne, for the children who had watched this unfold with wide eyes and quiet hearts, polls surged, letters poured in, crowds grew at every appearance. The nation wasn't losing faith in the monarchy, it was rediscovering it through the resilience of those who refused to be broken. And while pain had divided the family, it also revealed its unshakable core. New security protocols were quietly implemented. The royal vault was moved under direct oversight of a specialized historical committee. Inventory logs were digitized and encrypted. Every heirloom was photographed, catalogued, and bound to a new lineage document signed by both Catherine and Anne. These were no longer just jewels. They were restored relics of trust symbols reclaimed not by decree, but by conviction. Then, on a crisp spring evening, the monarchy delivered its final statement not through press or policy, but through presence. At a highly anticipated state banquet, Catherine stepped into the room wearing Diana's sapphire tiara, the very piece that had sparked the scandal, nearly erased, now recovered and worn with grace. The room fell into reverent silence. It was not simply a crown on her head, it was Diana's legacy, restored. It was Elizabeth's discipline, honoured. And it was Camilla's ambition, defeated. And while Camilla's secret plan collapsed, the scars it left behind would serve as a warning. Even the crown has enemies from within. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.